We identify the lost 10 tribes of Israel with peoples who live in the West, with the English-speaking peoples, and also peoples in Western Europe. And we don't say that everyone in those areas is descended from Hebrews. We say that a certain portion are, possibly a majority or a good portion of the population in all events according to indications. And they are where the lost 10 tribes are. That is where the Bible and the related sources says the lost 10 tribes are to be found. Lost 10 tribes are amongst those peoples in the offshoots in North America, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And on the whole, these people do not know that they descend from Israelites. That was the way it was supposed to be. They're not aware of their Hebrew ancestry, but it has to be known. In the end times, it will become known. And this seems to say a beginning or a continuation of efforts to make it known, to arouse people to take an interest in this subject and to study it, and to start a ball rolling, to do more research, encourage more research on it, to confirm it. The Bible speaks about it. The Bible speaks about the lost 10 tribes returning. The lost 10 tribes of Israel, you had 12 tribes of Israel, and originally you had 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel, the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. Israel had 12 sons, and these became the forefathers of the 12 tribes. And the 12 tribes of Israel, they were originally, they came out of Canaan, and they went down to Egypt in the time of Joseph, and they went to Egypt for a good number of years until the Egyptians began to oppress them, and they came out of Egypt under Moses, and they passed through the wilderness. And in the wilderness they received the Torah. Then they came to the land of Canaan and they conquered it. And the land was divided up amongst the different tribes. And then you had a period of judges, of conquest and reconquest, of wars and changes and different occurrences taking place. And then they decided to appoint themselves a king. King Saul from the tribe of Benjamin was the first king. King Saul was the first king. After King Saul came David. After David came Solomon. After Solomon came Rehoboam. And in the time of Rehoboam, the 10 northern tribes divided. They separated from the other tribes. So you had two separate kingdoms. So the kingdom of Judah, it's called Judah, but it comprises the tribe of Judah and also the tribe of Benjamin and most of the tribe of Levi. And after that, eventually a representative minority portions of the other tribes, also known together as known collectively as Judah. That's how it is referred to in the Bible. Judah, the kingdom of Judah, against the kingdom of Israel. The kingdom of Israel had 10 tribes. 10 tribes. There were 10 tribes in the kingdom of Israel. The kingdom of Israel had 10 tribes. The 10 tribes were Asher, Naphtali, Gad, Reuben, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, Shimon, Dan. So they are the 10 tribes of Israel. And these 10 tribes, they had separated from the southern tribe known as Judah. And these 10 tribes were different in some ways. They were less religious than the tribe of Judah, and they worshipped idols. They had golden calves in Brit-Am, and also in Dan in the north. They worshipped the golden calves. And they became pagans. They stopped practicing the rite of circumcision. They worshipped the Baal. Also intermingle with the Canaanite peoples around them until they were exiled. The Syrians came down, conquered them, and took them away into exile. And they disappeared. They disappeared from history, as did most Asian peoples. that existed at that time, everyone disappeared. That is, their physical descendants remain on the whole, but they don't know who they are. They're not aware of their ancestry. So too the same thing happened to the 10 tribes of Israel, because in effect, even before they were exiled, taken away by the Assyrians, they had, from a lot of points of view, ceased to be Israelites. And physically they remained descendants of Israel, even though they were to be glad from the point of view of the Jewish religion as to be considered non-Jewish. If someone comes today and says they are from one of the 10 tribes, they want to be accepted by the Jews, so they want to come and live in the land of Israel as a Jew, as the same as a Jew. And if theoretically they could prove it, they can't prove it, but if theoretically they could prove it without any shadow of a doubt, they would still have to undergo some type of renewal process, some type of requalification, of reacceptance. And this applies to the 10 tribes, it also applies to Jews. Someone from Judah is in that same category. But despite this, the 10 tribes are destined to return. The Bible says so. And rabbinical sources say so. Everything which is pertinent to the subject says so. The 10 tribes are destined to return. They're destined to return and reunite with Judah. See Isaiah 11:12-13, Jeremiah 31:19-20, Ezekiel 37:16-28, Isaiah 1-10, Isaiah 2-1, Isaiah 2-23. And the major rabbis also in the Talmud and other places also spoke of those 10 tribes returning. It says in Midrashim, as well as in the Talmud, the 10 tribes are destined to return. It says the exile, and it also says to the Jews, the exiles of Judah and Benjamin, that is the present-day Jewish people, are destined to go unto them, to go unto the 10 tribes and bring them back in order to merit with them in the Messianic era. And life in the world to come. In the end times, people from Judah are to go out to the 10 tribes and tell them who they are and bring them back. So that we have not reached that stage yet, and how it will come about we don't know, but it is significant enough that it has been prophesied that that is what will take place. See Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 18. In those days the house of Judah shall go unto the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north, unto the land that I have given for inheritance unto your fathers. So that is what will be and what we have. And that is what we are faced with. And these 10 tribes who were exiled, taken away by the Assyrians, they were re-established, they were resettled in different areas of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians used to do that, to take people from one area, uproot them, and resettle them in another area. They switch people around. According to the Talmud, also confirmed by archaeology, by inscriptions, at least in some cases, they take men from one area and women from another and also bring them together. They would mix the peoples up. Not in every case, but in some cases. At all events, the peoples would be moved around, and that is what happened not only to the Israelites, but to all the peoples of the region at that time. Eventually, the Israelites, in their places of exile, due to a combination of circumstances and their own efforts, they managed to throw off the yoke of the Assyrians, to become virtually independent, to go to war against the Assyrians, eventually even to take control of the Assyrian Empire for a portion of time. But then to be expelled, to be forced out and moved, and they did move. They moved to the west. Eventually, they moved to the west along several different pathways of migration. They all had the effect of reconversion, of coming back into the one area. who were peoples who were taken overland, or moved overland, or peoples who were taken by way of the sea. And all of these rights were exiled, not just a few, not just a minority, as some want to say. All of these Israelites were exiled, and archaeologists have shown this. They have not found a single settlement, not one single Israelite settlement that continued after the Assyrian conquest, with the Israelites in it. Not one single settlement. They're all destroyed, burnt down to the ground, and all of their people taken away. Now, a portion of these people were taken away with Assyrians using proxies, that is, using subcontractors, one could say, people who helped them in their colonial enterprises, such as the Phoenicians and the Philistines and the Edomites. They put the Israelites on ships and they took them across the sea. They took them to Spain, they took them to Gaul, that is France of today. They also took them to the British Isles. And they also took them to Scandinavia. At that time, the climate was somewhat different from what it is today. And at all events, these Israelites who were taken away in ships are manned by the people from Tyre, and also from the Philistines. The Philistines had the Minoan and Mycenaean Greek civilization, and they used ships and they traveled in ships. And Amos, chapter 1, 6 to 10, speaks of this in the Hebrew. So that is one avenue of migration, one way they reached the west. They're also taken overland to areas in northern Mesopotamia, northern Iraq of today, in the region of Kurdistan, and also regions in eastern Iran, that area. And in those areas, they federated with other peoples, and they eventually became part of the Scythians and the Cimmerian peoples. And these peoples too, they rebelled against the Assyrians, as did the Israelites, and they established themselves as independent entities. And they too were pushed northward, pushed to the Caucasus region, pushed to the north, into Turkey, beyond Turkey, into the southern Russia and southeast Europe. And from there, they were, due to the force of circumstances and the course of centuries, pushed out by others, and they went to the west, eventually converging in France, in Scandinavia, and in the British Isles. And there are different movements. We can trace different migratory movements of these people. So the bottom line is that they all went in that region, along that path, in several stages. We can even date the times they came, or the times they settled in those regions, or we can use approximate dates, because the experts, the archaeologists, the historians, also are not certain what time, what stage. Certain peoples arrived in those regions, but they are certain that they did arrive. And they included the peoples of history that we know about, the Goths and the people of France, of Gaul, and the Vikings of Scandinavia, and the Normans and the Angles and the Saxons, and the people of Celtic culture in the British Isles, and so on. So the Naphtalites, who settled in Scandinavia, Naphthalite, the people known as Naphthalite Huns, Naphthalite, and here we have the name of one of the Israelite tribes, and peoples who are settling in that area, Naphtalites. We also have other names, the Dan, the tribe of Dan, they settled in Denmark, gave their name to Denmark, the Danites, the Danim. Other groups, which I have in the Picts, who went to Scotland. The Picts were related to the Agathyrsi, also known as the Khazars. The Khazars remained in that area, and they converted to Judaism at a later date. And in that way, they reattached themselves to the Israelite peoples, which is interesting. And on the whole, the peoples moved together. Here and there, they remained behind, that is, scattered in different areas of Europe and their impressions are that in the 1700s, 1800s, when there was a great migration to the USA from areas of Germany, from areas of Europe, that the peoples leaving those regions were different from those who stayed behind. It was if they picked themselves out, separated themselves from their neighbors, because it always been different from their neighbors, and they moved to North America. And we identify those people too as descended from Israel, and even had sociological characteristics that we can use to differentiate them from the others. That is, we are not doing the differentiation. Usually it is social, historical, sociological historians who do this. But we take their findings and we use them for our purpose to enhance our understanding, to help establish our understanding of what actually did happen, of how the Israelites, descendants of Israel, did congregate in different areas and rejoin and reattach themselves one to another. At all events, the end result is that the lost 10 tribes are in the areas of the West, where they were destined to be found in the end times. It says that it will be at the continental extremities of the earth, the Katsai Arts, the ends of the earth, that there will be in the north country, there will be in isles and so on. See Isaiah 41, 1 to 9. See also Deuteronomy 33:13, Isaiah 24:16, 26:15, 41, 8 to 9, and more. Isaiah 49:6 says, "It is a small thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob." Here we have the tribes of Jacob being referred to, and restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also give you as a light to the Gentiles, and you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth. Other aspects of the 10 tribes are to be found, such as they were to be exceedingly numerous. See Genesis 16:10, 22:17, Isaiah 1:10, to be the richest, Genesis 27:28, 49:25, Deuteronomy 33:13, 16, Isaiah 2:8, and the most powerful countries of the earth. See Numbers 24:8 to 7, Micah 5:7 to 9. They will control the major international strategic passes of the world. See Genesis 22:16 to 17, 24:16, where he speaks about the descendants of Abraham possessing the gates or the pathways, the entrance points of the enemies, that is strategic areas, strategic points upon the face of the globe that enable the control of international waterways or international thoroughfares. For instance, the Malacca Straits, the area between Malaya and Indonesia, that in effect controls the avenue, the pathway of petroleum, of oil to China. That whoever controls that area, the Malacca Straits, decides, has veto powers over whether China receives its oil or not, China and Japan. So that could be considered a great of their enemies that was promised to Abraham. And there are a few places like that, such as the Suez Canal area and so on. And all of these, in the past, were under the control of Britain or the USA, and even now, Britain and the USA have a de facto control over them. The lost 10 tribes were likened unto a lion and a unicorn. See Numbers 24:8 to 9. These are the symbols of Britain. They were to be unaware of the Israelite identity and to practice a non-Jewish religion. See Hosea 2:8, 2:13, 2:16, 11, 12. There were to be many oceans and islands in the north and west in the coastlands. So we have these are biblical proofs, indications as to where the lost 10 tribes are. In addition to that, we also have biblical, rabbinical sources that add to this. For instance, on the book of Abijah 120, it says that the lost 10 tribes are in Zarephath. Zarephath, according to Rashi, that is France, and Rashi says that is where the lost 10 tribes are. The Hebrew there, the Hebrew original, says this first exile, that is the first exile of the 10 tribes. Rashi says it's referring to the 10 tribes. Shall be in Zarephath, which he says means a land known as France. Zarephath, the word used in the Bible, Zarephath, is the Hebrew word for France. And Barbanel says not only does it mean France, it also means Britain. In this case, it is referring to both Britain and to France because they're to both areas where the exile is taken. And also the Malbim, he says that these verses refer to the 10 tribes. Hatim Sofer said that in the end time of the Messiah, the areas of Britain and parts of Western Europe will be part of the promised land of Israel. So this is important. We also have legends, Jewish legends from the Second Temple period. And then the Jews remained in the area. Many of the Jews were expelled. Some remained in the area, and then further expulsions took place until they were expelled altogether. But there were Jewish communities all over the area, also in Yemen and in Arab areas, and they had their own culture, and they also have legends. We have some of their legends. Some of their legends are still with us. Some of them were taken over by the Arabs, incorporated in the Quran, for what it's worth. At all events, one of these legends, one of these Arab Jewish legends, we have from a Jewish source, refers to the sons of Aid and Had. And Had is another name for Jews, Yahud, Had. And Aid was the eldest son, but he was proud. And Had rebuked Aid for his froward ways. And Aid would not listen, so he was expelled. He was sent away, sent into exile into the Holy Islands in the West, which means the Isles of Britain in classical terminology. The British Isles are known as the Blessed Isles in early medieval writings and early Roman Christian writings or writings of that era. And also other legends speak of the sons of Moses associated with the 10 tribes, also with them in those regions. So this too is a proof that there was such an idea. That not only does the Bible speak of it, but the Jews of that time also had such a notion. We don't know how many believe this, how many accepted it, but it's there in writings. There were some amongst them who knew of it and spoke of it. Even Josephus was an early Jewish historian. He was president at the time of the Second Temple, and the Second Temple was destroyed. And he wrote, after that, he wrote a history of the wars of the Jews against the Romans. And also he wrote Antiquities. He wrote a whole history of the Hebrew peoples. And there he mentions the prophecy of Balaam. Balaam was a heathen prophet who prophesied against Israel in the end times. Josephus understands Balaam to be referring to the Israelites in the end times. He says the multitude of your posterity also should live as well in the islands as on the continents, and that more in number than the other stars of heaven. This is referring to the 10 tribes of Israel according to other sources.